as well. Let's discuss this now. We have a terrific panel for you. Brendon O'Connor from the US Studies Centre at Sydney University. We also have Tom Switzer, former editor of Spectator magazine, and Armin Seikl from the Australian National University. I want to start with you first, Brendon. There has been criticism of Barack Obama for not having a strategy. The world has been looking to him for leadership. Has he delivered?
Well, it was a political speech. I think in many ways, Stan, that it was a speech that was to show Obama as strong. It was to make a case for the United States as still being really the indispensable nation in the world regarding these types of crises, and to present this case that America could be successful. I think he may have overstated things. I think if we look at the record of training Iraqi troops or Afghani troops, it hasn't been terrific. If we look at the record of sort of Sunni radical groupings within Iraq, they've been put down in certain periods of success and then tended to rear back up again. So what will stop ISIL in some ways going to ground, not fighting for a time, but then hoping the Americans lose interest with this issue. So it was a speech that Obama, I think, had to make in some regards, but his chances of total success I don't think are particularly good here.
Yeah, Tom Switzer, there's an old boxing dictum, I had a plan until I got hit. What is the chances of the coalition getting hit? What are the chances of Obama being dragged back into a conflict without end?
Well, I think this has the potential to be more ambitious and conceivably open-ended than the president implies. You have to remember, although something like 70% of the American people support the airstrike campaign against ISIS or IS, the fact of the matter is the American people are war-weary, they're tired of the world, they're suffering from foreign policy fatigue, and while they're quick to be aroused, Iraq has already shown that they have very limited attention span and staying power to fight these things. I mean, eradicating an evil group like ISIS is a long, tough slog. And the two important caveats we have to recognise here is that the President has made it clear there will be no ground troops, and moreover, all the available evidence seems to indicate that it's highly unlikely we will get a genuine political consensus in Baghdad, and that means integrating the Sunni Arabs who
Tom,
continue
That is going to be critical. I will come back to that, and I want to bring Professor Armin Seikl on just on that point, trying to get a consensus in Iraq, but also a consensus regionally. How do you stitch together a coalition that may involve countries like Saudi Arabia on the one hand, Iran on the other, Turkey, potentially even Bashar al-Assad in Syria? Is this too ambitious, and will it hold?
I think it is very ambitious at this point, and I think he's going to find it very difficult to get a national consensus in Iraq and also in the region. It is going to be a really uphill battle for him to get the cooperation of all the Sunni states, that is Arab states, under the leadership of Saudi Arabia, to really cooperate in operation which could really result in the benefit of Iran. And I think the Arab countries will be extremely wary of that. Of course, the Arab League has said that they're going to, they're totally opposed to ISIS, and they will cooperate, but I think their cooperation is going to be limited if it means, if the operations really mean an improvement in the position of Iran in the region. Also, may I add that now President Obama has in many ways really taken America and its allies back to what President Bush had started, and that's the war on terror, without now involving a large number of American troops on the ground. And it is also important to be reminded that the United States and its allies have been fighting the Taliban for the last 13 years. They have not been able to contain the Taliban, let alone to defeat them.
That's an interesting arc, isn't it, of President Obama's term in office. He came in as someone wanting to extract the United States from conflict. He even won a Nobel Peace Prize. And Brendon O'Connor, here he is once again recommitting the US to a fight against militant groups and being drawn back into Iraq, a country he had thought he'd left behind. What does it say about the nature of that conflict? What does it say also about the nature of the United States' place in the world?
Well, I think the point being made that this is really a continuation of the war on terror is a very good one, that the war on terror frame was so dominant after September 11, 2001 in the United States, it's almost hard to escape. And I think Obama at times has wanted to escape it and say, look, this is a regional threat. These people are not likely to be turning up in the United States. They're not likely to be hijacking planes in the way that those terrorist attacks did 13 years ago. So I think he's wanted to do that, but when the journalists were killed in northern Iraq, he's falling back on maybe some of the arguments we saw under the Bush administration and not really presenting this possibly as the way it should be, I think, as more of a regional problem rather than an international problem. Where Obama maybe could have talked more for his case about America's special role was in northern Iraq and made a case to say, look, there were vulnerable people. Those people, no matter what had come before, deserve some humanitarian assistance, and we were able to do something noble. He touched on that. He suggested only the United States really could do something and or cared enough about these people and had the capacity to do something. But he's mixing two, I think, fairly different things there together: humanitarian assistance and the old story of the war on terror.
Tom Switzer, Australia has been involved in the humanitarian effort thus far. It will be called upon to be part of this broader coalition. What can we expect from Australia? What role will it play?
Well, I think that what distinguishes the Australian response in 2014 to the Australian response in 2003 is bipartisanship. The opposition leader Bill Shorten has made it quite clear that the Labor Party will give strong support to Tony Abbott and the coalition. John Howard did not have that bipartisan support from Simon Crean and the Labor opposition. But I suspect this means that Australia will be committing the Super Hornets, air support, maybe even SAS commanders. There is a great debate about to what extent do the SAS troops actually constitute ground troops, but I think Australia will be one of the major contributors to this mission, probably one of the top 5 countries in this coalition.
Professor Sarkar, we've heard from Prime Minister Abbott here about the potential threat to Australia. Indeed, Australia is considering right now lifting its terror alert warning level. We also heard from Barack Obama there raising particular concern about the number of foreign fighters who have joined Islamic State and the potential to return to their home countries and carry out attacks there. How real is that threat? Is the West, is the rest of the world a broader target for Islamic State?
I mean, there is potential for that, and of course the ISIS does have its supporters abroad, and they may be inflamed and engage in violent actions. But at the same time, we must remember that many of those people who've gone to fight along the side of ISIS, they are most unlikely to return to Australia. It is also very possible that quite a number of them would be killed by the time this conflict is over, which is going to take a very long time and is going to prove to be very costly, not only for the United States but also for its allies, particularly at the time when their economies are in a very fragile state and their financial positions are not very strong. Although President Obama said that the United States is making a fast economic recovery, and that is really true to some extent, but at the same time there could be developments which could cause a lot of setbacks. So I think at this stage the threat to a country like Australia is not really as high as one could possibly imagine, and I really do not expect many Australian Muslims or elements among the Australian Muslims would be in a position to engage any type of actions which cause a serious concern for this country. But at the same time, it is the responsibility of the government and Australian the intelligence agencies to be very watchful of the situation, and I think that is what David Irwin has outlined, that he might really raise the level of alert in this country.
To the extent that this is a continuation of the war on terror, does this have to be more than just about Islamic State? Does this also mean continuing the attacks against Al-Qaeda, continuing to watch the potential return of the Taliban in Afghanistan? There are multiple fronts to this. Are we looking for a broader strategy here?
Well, I think this is what President Obama has implied, and I think it is a very broad strategy. It's the same sort of a strategy that President Bush had outlined and pushed for. And of course, that strategy has not been very successful because they have not been able to contain the Taliban in Afghanistan. They have not been able to defeat Al-Qaeda altogether. In fact, new fronts have been opened for Al-Qaeda to establish a very strong niche. And now also we have the emergence of ISIS. We have the Boko Haram in Africa, we've got the Al-Shabaab in Somalia, we've got the Al-Qaeda in Yemen and North Africa. So I think the more conflict situations you have, the more opportunities you really provide for these extremist groups. I think what President Obama and its international allies would need to do is to change the conditions to the extent which will not really give rise to individuals like Osama bin Laden, like al-Baghdadi, and not giving rise to such groups as Al-Qaeda and ISIL.
Insightful, Brendon O'Connor, Tom Switzer, thank you again for joining us here as we continue our analysis of President Obama's speech to the American people about his strategy for dealing with Islamic State. He has